participants, and a combination of panelists. And first and foremost, I want to express my appreciation to everyone that's on the task force. They've been on multiple and numerous meetings over the past month and have done incredible things. So thank you to all of you. The task force has moved swiftly and nimbly based on the Governor Mills opening up of Maine 4 stages. They have spoken to state officials on the information gathering team and have represented all Maine camps. I know the decision of closing, delaying, opening for 2020 is weighing on all of our minds. And every scenario is difficult and presents its own challenges. And thank you to all those camps that are keeping Ron updated with how their decision-making and the position they're in. We truly, really appreciate that. It helps us give an understanding of what our membership are facing and experiencing. I've been personally relying on a lot of intentional, deep breathing just to get me through the daily load of information and the ups and downs and the roller coaster rides. So I implore everyone to please just take some deep, deep breaths. Collaboratively, the task force have been in incredible efforts and have represented all Maine camps. And I want you all to remember that we're here to support you all in the process and journey that we're going through. And today, thankfully, Matt is also volunteered again to lead the town hall. And the efforts that go into that and preparing the agenda is also very time consuming and difficult. And my husband, on a light-hearted note, was picking up 6 pigs yesterday that we have through the summer, 10 pigs yesterday that we have through the summer at a place located next to Matt at camp, down at Maine team camps. Nice. And they said they've always got a wonderful response from your maintenance team and they know them. And thank you for being your business.
So, good job.
With that, over to you.
All right. So before we kick off into the agenda quickly, I just want to go through some housekeeping, some notes about this. Just reminding everyone, this is a webinar, not a meeting. So you're only going to be able to see your assigned panelists on the screen. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A. We'll monitor the chat, but it can sometimes move quickly. So we might move questions, we might miss questions that you see there. So if you look up on the bottom of your screen, actually, you should see a Q&A button. You can type a question in there. We'll be able to answer it, hopefully. Make sure that your name on your participant name is accurate. So if you are asking a question, we know who is asking the question. We would recommend that you use the speaker view so that you're seeing one person at a time, but you can use the grid view if you like. Press the little waffle looking icon in the top right corner. We'll run a few polls and they will be done for about, I would say 90 seconds. And so we're just gonna do a little sample poll here, and that should be popping up on your screens now. If people want to vote for who they would like to be quarantined in a house with, and you can see the way the voting works. We'll be doing a few of these with a little more seriously through the thing, but it's good to see that Ron Hall is running a really close second with Michelle Obama there. So yeah.
Hey, Matt, I don't know if you know this, panelists can't vote.
Oh, Fritz, I'm really sorry. I'll make
Ron Hall had my vote, #1.
I know, absolutely. All right, so we're going to do a couple of polls like that during the meeting to gauge people's thinking and reactions for where they're at right now. But without any additional housekeeping or notes, unless I've missed something, Bajette? I don't think so. Okay. We're going to kick off today with a discussion led by the members of Maine Summer Camps who met with the governors and the state's representatives yesterday, and so that's going to be Laura Ordway, Steve, Tom Doherty, and Peter, and then also with comments from Ron and Jack. So if you guys want to take it away, Steve, you're going to kick it off?
Sure, I'll kick it off. Ooh, boy, trying times. And as you guys know, as the calendar like changes every hour of every day, I'm sure that you are very up to speed on the fact that we had a meeting scheduled on Tuesday afternoon. It was moved to a different time on Tuesday afternoon, was moved to a different time on Tuesday afternoon, and was ultimately moved to Thursday. Thursday successfully occurred. It was, as Matt mentioned, it was Laura, Tom, Steve, Ron, and Jack on the call, and there was quite a representation from state officials, 9 different people, and we thought we were going to get about 20 to 25 minutes of a chance to talk and interject, and we ended up with about 55 minutes. You're gonna be seeking a lot of questions, and we know that. What we're trying to do today is have us all understand what yesterday really was, and that was the state seeking information. They were the information gathering team. They're not the final decision making. That at the end of a 1-hour call, we know all the answers to the questions. We listened. We also debriefed after for 2 hours, and we came up with a variety of different takeaways of what we've heard, what we think we were able to interject. I think we all know that this, unfortunately, is, depending on how you hear this message, it's still a work in progress when it comes to answers. We're willing to try to answer some of those questions in ways that we are able to answer today. And we're willing to give you guys some takeaways on what we heard and where we thought there was focus. We were able, in my opinion, to insert some recommendations for what they consider as they get into the details. Laura, Tom, I'm willing to toss 2 of those big decisions, 2 suggestions out there now, or I'm also more than happy to let you guys, wingman with me and do it with me. But
keep going. We'll fill in after you're completed.
Okay. So one item is if you consider the concept that this is a staged approach to an opening of a state and an economy, with safety and health in mind as the #1 determining factor as they go forward with that economic opening. That was a very loud and clear message. This is not an economic opening process with a safety component. It is a safety component with a concept of a potential economic opening. I think we heard that loud and clear. As we are in stage 1 now that it's May 1st, things that are stage 1 carry to stage 2. Things that are stage 2 carry to stage 3. As we get into the stages, more things potentially, in effect, loosen up, open up to some degree. Day camp, as I'm sure you guys have heard, is in the stage 2 recommendation. The reasoning behind that sounds very much as in support to the economy opening and in support to as an essential concept for getting people back to work. Okay. The term resident camp was not used. The term summer camp was used, that is included in stage 3, which is a July 1 and through the month of July through the month of August. And as you probably know, the stage 4 is a to be determined date later. We specifically heard, because we specifically asked them to consider what some of the stage 3 concepts are that revolve around a current 14-day quarantine on entry to the state, and a current understanding of a group size of 50 or less. As you can imagine, a current quarantine on entry to the state is a tourism-based industry anxiety. Let's put it that way to be very clear. The state people are very anxious. We know Maine tourism is very anxious. You can see that in the media. You can hear it for sure on anything you read and watch at this stage. So one thing that we heard as we in effect proposed is, would there be any consideration for the concept of staff arriving prior to July 1 if in fact your property needs to be ready to go and be trained and oriented before the children arrive? And we would say that in general, they were accepting of listening to that consideration. This is a tough tightrope. In effect, what we will be confirming to and requiring to do, if in fact we are able to let staff come prior to the stage 3 opening date, is that means that the staff arrival will be in some level of quarantine concept. Okay. In effect, could you possibly have staff training and orientation in the month of July in quarantine as a family, as a group on your property, within understanding of whatever the limit on size restrictions are, whatever the limits on distancing and personal protective equipment are when you cannot distance, etc. I believe they're willing to listen to that concept. A next big one would be the concept of, you hear these volumes of 50, group sizes of 50 or less. And you have to take this into the consideration a little bit that, again, health and safety, if you are a blueberry festival and you have a couple hundred people congregating and then they all scatter, the contact tracing efforts are pretty challenging. So what we have also offered for them to consider is, how could we consider being cohort subset groups within a property, within a facility that follow the guidelines that are trying to be created. And in effect, could you consider having smaller subset groups that in effect means the larger group is bigger than 50 only? Okay. There's a lot of detail to be worked out there. There's a lot of there's a lot of questions that we have been asking ourselves that we are getting from you. There are a lot of questions that they have for us and that we helped to provide. And I would just say again that I felt that there was some reception to the concept of consideration. Again, these are not the decision makers as much as the information gatherers that occurred yesterday afternoon. The other pieces that we tried to listen towards and feel that we can share with you to be aware of as you consider your decision making and your processes. These checklists that are being created for stage 1, 2, 3, which are, I believe, the current priority for them to get those established by industry. Here are a few things for you to start to sort out in your mind. Be prepared to hear that you will need to have some level of an isolation plan so that you have the ability to isolate infected, virus, symptomatic population. In order to be able to pass through a checklist, you're going to have to be able to have a plan in place that shows that there's some level of an isolation plan. Be prepared to consider how you might identify and determine in your own minds where you go with high-risk population youth and high-risk population staff. Laura, Tom, Ron, Jack.
Great.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've hit 5.
Okay. Steve, that was awesome. I'm going to fill in a couple other things. That was an excellent overview. In no particular order, it was a cordial meeting. It was positive overall. They looked a little beat up from other industries, and we were determined to be firm but not be one of the industries also in line to beat them up. And I think that was very well received. They do know the value of camp. We didn't have to spend time on that. We didn't have to, let them know the social and economic and philosophical value of camp. In fact, a couple of the panelists from the state administration have their own kids in Maine camps. There was some unclarity about what we actually are as Maine summer camps, and the fact that Maine does have licensed summer camps. I won't be surprised if they're going to lump our guidelines in with schools and university-based day camps such as band camps or sports camps. Luckily Jack was there to clarify the legal definition of a licensed youth camp in the state of Maine. I will echo what Steve said. There was a definite tone of Maine people first. That was a big message of yesterday. So we don't have a lot of clarity of what that's going to look like for our particular summer camp for day and residential camp guidelines, but that was certainly part of their tone. And Dr. Laura Blaisdell's demonstration document, which is again just an outline very similar to what you all have seen of her presentation a couple weeks ago, was well received, and that was part of our conversation with them. And again, they didn't take it as a blueprint, but they took it as something that they were very thankful that we came prepared. So that was part of our meeting also. And I just will wrap up with my comments with when we say we're waiting for more information, the guideline they gave us was restaurants, hotels, and summer camps are quite anxious for news, and we hope to get your guidelines to you within 10 days. That was a working time frame. And before I pass it over to Tom, let me just see if I can answer some of these questions here. can you clarify if stage 2 for day camps is only for Maine residents, or can out-of-staters attend if they quarantine first starting June 1st? We cannot clarify that. They did not clarify that. We hope that the guidelines that they publish within the next day will clarify that. Molly asked that. Wouldn't staff all need to self-quarantine first before coming together so that they aren't exposing each other? Our staff come from all over the country. That was answered in yes and no. If you have Maine-based staff, they're already considered clear. So they would not have to self-quarantine once they arrived on your property. But it did seem like it was going to be something we should plan for staff coming from outside the state of Maine to be ready to be isolated on your camp property as a group. And I'll pass it over to Tom to fill in some things about day camps and maybe take the next questions there.
Sure. Thanks, Laura. I was buoyed by the fact that they sort of put day camps with the rest of camps, and day camps obviously come in phase 2, as Steve was mentioning. I think hopefully that would get us information a little quicker so that we could start to plan. To echo what Steve said, I think they definitely see day camps and other camps as a way to get people back to work. Although I would also echo what Steve said in that they don't, this was very much a public health concern. There wasn't a lot of discussion of economics. There wasn't a lot of discussion of that type of thing. So I think that's a piece that we need to be aware of if we're talking to people, that it was very much around public health. I was very interested, as I think every camp person is, about these cohorts of initially in June 10 and then in 50. I think they heard us on that. They obviously couldn't commit to anything, but I think we made the point that that would be very important in terms of making camp viable. And I'm trying to think of other things in my notes. I can take a few questions here. So. Heidi asked in the chat there, do you mean staff training starting in July or June? I think what we asked, and Steve said this a little bit before, is that we were seeking permission to start that quarantine process with out-of-state staff in the June timeframe so that camps would be up and ready to go on July 1st. And I think Ron made that point, Steve, several people made that point, that was a really important ability for camps to be able to survive and operate if they're going to do that. So, and I'm just looking at other questions here. They didn't. Does 50 include the staff? And they didn't give us any clarification on that. We're at Catch-Out, we're assuming that 50 includes the staff for our planning purposes, but that's us internally only. That's not what they were saying. So, but.
Do one of you want to comment on the isolation of staff through cohorts while they're at camp, and the fact that they could undergo training?
I can take that. My sense is that, I mean, and that's the way we would operate. I think they were open to hearing that. Again, we'd have to wait to hear the final guidance, but I think I think we were very clear that getting the staff ready to roll on July 1st was an essential piece of our operations.
So I'll just add that one of the things, just to back up slightly for some of the terminology, one of the things that Dr. Laura Blaisdell is trying to present on all camps' behalf is the fact that a camp in and of itself will be a private entity. And so we're hoping that no matter what your camp size is, if you can demonstrate the idea of isolation as a camp as a whole, then we might, again, caveat, we don't know the answer, we might not have to cohort in the same numbers that were given out in terms of 50 people, because we could look at the camp as an isolated population. But within that larger camp group, they might define that you have to cohort, which is based on, for some places, on age or by arrival date. And you'd have to cohort with staff and children in that group for an extended period of time, so that there's not mixing of staff from one age group or one cohort group and to another one to another one. So again, there does look like there's a path forward to implement the spirit of the isolation without staying strictly to the 50-person maximum, but we didn't get a strong answer one way or the other back on that. But we did push hard for that interpretation that your camp would be considered the isolation group.
Can I get one of you to comment? And Rick has asked a question in the Q&A that I think is probably on a lot of people's minds. And while we're on this discussion of staff and cohorts and quarantine periods, what was your impression about the idea of staff? They come to camp, they quarantine for 14 days. Are they then isolated within camp, or are they then considered like a, main resident from that point forward?
So trending towards the official kind of answer to that question yesterday was, once you're here for 14 days, you've successfully passed through your quarantine mandate. What was not clear and what was was definitely noticed was that perhaps camps would have to consider what would be logical and safe interaction in this public and in social circles, and what would be probably unwise and unsafe kind of interactions within the communities. In other words, we didn't get the answer, but officially, if you think of it in those terms at present, when you arrive in the state, you are to quarantine for 14 days. Once you have quarantined for 14 days and you have passed through your concept of being non-symptomatic, then you're part of the state of Maine. Okay. Somebody did ask, can I quarantine my staff in Vermont or New Hampshire and then come to Maine? And I would say in today's interpretation, that would be a no. Somebody asked, is July 1 July 1, or is June 28th July 1? And in today's interpretation, July 1 is July 1. Tom, there's some day camp questions. I'm happy to do them, but if in the Q&A there's a fair bit there that's day, I can pass it to you, or we can just keep rolling here.
Steve, I can take a stab at this, and feel free to come in behind me. Brittany asked, was there any discussion regarding guidance, a checklist for day camps to open? I mean, I think that's coming from them. I think we're going to get that thing. The thing that we're working off of is what Dr. Laura presented, and trying to figure out how we would meet some of those guidelines. So yeah, I think there is definitely going to be a checklist, and we'll do like all the other industries, go on the website and swear allegiance to it, and to make sure that we did that. There was another. I was looking for other day camp stuff. That's
the next question, Stacy's question, Tom, about if you had an outbreak at day camp, would you need to close for 14 days?
We didn't get any. I don't remember any guidance on that. I don't know how they would handle that. Yeah, that would be a tough one.
I'll jump in just for a second. And the criteria we've seen does not have the 14-day. 14 days is used as an isolation criteria to see if someone's sick. 7 days is used as the recovery time, which you would need to isolate someone for recovery if they are deemed presumptive positive. And then anywhere from 1 to 2 days, we've seen some different guidelines about cleaning and how long you have to close to clean. Again, this is a guideline. They know that there are places like rehabilitation and nursing homes that can't close down. So there are guidelines to remain open as a facility, even with presumptive positives, and still move forward. So part of those were in the demonstration document that Dr. Laura presented, but again, we didn't get clear guidance as to what they're going to do. Although, since it wasn't high on their list of saying, something similar to, do you know how difficult it would be for you all to close down? They never said that once about cleaning. So I would say there's more positive messaging on what they would work with us if we had positive cases, either in a day camp or residential setting.
There's multiple questions popping up around the idea of staff quarantined and isolated for 14 days, out-of-state staff, not main-based staff, out-of-state staff, and then campers arriving to camp. Would that reset the quarantine period for staff as well, for any out-of-state campers arriving, or was that not discussed?
I'm going to say that particular question wasn't discussed in that detail, although we're going to see answers to that, the delineation of, I think what our team did well was delineate between needs and requirements of staff and needs and requirements of campers. And I think you're going to see in the document more guidance as to what staff will do and what campers will do. Not to say that they're going to be widely different, but they do realize that, again, it seemed beneficial to have the okay moving forward, that staff can arrive earlier and be quarantined and then be quote unquote quarantined and safe to move about the state of Maine with non-high risk activities.
Okay, and Laura, while you're on that, do you want to keep rolling with the idea of parents arriving from out of state and dropping kids off at camp, and the idea of home to home travel?
We didn't have to say too much. They kind of stopped that line of questioning because they've been beat up pretty hard by the hospitality industry. So we're going to let the hospitality industry do the heavy lifting on that. And we made it clear that we would need guidance about campers from out of state and how they could travel safely with parents or on buses or other modes of transportation to be accepted into our camps, knowing that parents are not going to then spend 14 days isolating themselves after they've dropped off their campers. So they shut down that line of questioning pretty quick, knowing that they had heard already from hospitality that was an issue they were working on. They did not have an answer for us.
What we have done with that is introduce the concept of a term that you could consider as home to camp to home for a drop-off. That's a term that was introduced.
And then just before we move forward, there seems to be several questions as well about the concept of social distancing at camp and the ideas of sport and those sorts of things. Did anyone from the state mention any of those kind of concepts yesterday?
Yeah, again, the idea is if you can be an isolated community onto yourselves as a camp, then the social distancing guidelines become realistic within that environment rather than mandated, since you are supervising and you are monitoring everyone's health. Where it's not practical to social distance within that community, there might be a requirement for face masks. When it is non-practical for face masks within that community, it might be a requirement for staff to have face masks on. So there is a descending order of what is practical and reasonable, which is part of the Mills administration outline of reopening the state. So we're hoping that practical and reasonable means that we won't be mandated to 6 feet at all times from another person at camp, because that would be impossible for us to maintain. You're on mute, Matt.
Yeah, I realize that. Thanks, Laura. We'll come back, and there's a ton of questions popping up in the Q&A. So we might just push forward with the agenda a little bit and try to come back to some of this stuff and maybe consolidate some of those questions. I think those were a lot of the hot topics that we had. But
Matt, can I just, before you go on, just to clarify, we keep talking about the hospitality industry. In the phase starting July 1, hotels are able to take reservations. And at the same time, the 14-day quarantine is still in place. And so obviously that's not going to work for the hotels. And there is a huge pushback on that. And at least some communication indicates that they are looking at how they may adjust that 14-day quarantine in July.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Ron. Ron, while you're speaking, do you want to give us an update on your media appearances or anything else that is front of your mind as we go through this?
Just a slight one. I mean, I have camps have been notifying me when they've been contacted by the media, and I have then had many interviews from CNN to Zoom to New York Times to Portland Press Herald. And personally, I have found all of the reporters that have interviewed me to be very willing to sort of listen to what this is all about. Some have come with preconceived notions, and after we finish talking, they really look at how Maine, at least, is dealing with the situation. And I guess I would say I would continue to encourage people to give them my email address, my phone number, and I'm happy to keep talking.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ron. Next, can we get Bajette and Betty to give us an update on the other New England states and your ACA meeting of the heads of the New England states and where other states in our neighborhood are at?
Yes. So we met on Wednesday, and we have now decided to meet weekly through that meeting because things are now happening so rapidly in every state, and the timing of people wanting answers on the state community is getting more intense. So I'm just going to go through briefly some by state of what was discussed from each president. Each state is in different stages of communication with their governing level and guidelines. So Vermont was talking about, one of their largest camps announced a closure, the Aloha, which was a not-for-profit, which has 6 camps, I believe. So that was a huge thing in that state. And then the people that are having, the camp directors of smaller family-owned camps in the state of Vermont are really struggling. And a lot of those smaller camps, unfortunately, the word is that they didn't get the PPP, the payroll protection plan. And so they're struggling in the sense that they may not have the alumni support, or not support, but large bodies of alumni to support them. and like a not-for-profit camp may have with endowments and a larger support to help them through these financial decisions and the crisis that's been, what occurs after deciding not to open. So over in Vermont, the feeling is really uneasy, and they are meeting every 2 weeks right now, and the ACA ACA New England is going to help put something together for the smaller camps to help provide support in that area. Rhode Island, you know, a lot of the discussion is not many camps have closed yet. They're still waiting for this CDC and EHE, which is the environmental health economic information that is being put together before camps are making decisions. They said some of the overnight camps are seeing a decrease in registrations, and that they're definitely not relying on international staff at this point. And transportation is a big issue on the camps right now. In New Hampshire, there's a economic opening. The governor has an economic opening task force that their camps were hoping to get represented at. At this point, the General Camp Association wasn't given an opportunity to speak or be represented. However, there was a representation from the CEO of Boys and Girls Club of Concord, spoke for camps, and the sentiment was that they did a decent job. So they're hoping that at the subcommittee, they'll get a subcommittee that will allow camps, that will formulate the guidance for camps from that economic committee. Resident camps are trying to push the state to wait to get the CDC ACA guidelines that are coming out, which Betty can talk about the timeline on that. And there's been off and on discussion about a start date for certain residential camps starting, you know, July 11th, July 12th, shortening sessions for that. In Connecticut, the interesting thing there is that they're governed by the Office of Early Childhood, which means they're quite different in their governance compared to us with the Department of Health and Human Services, which we've crafted out, and Jack has advocated and kept us under and delineating us for specific reasons, so we're not under the same guidance. So as a result, their guidance for camps came under the childhood, and there was information released, I think approximately like 2 weeks ago, on what that essential guidance would look like. I do believe that document got passed around to the membership. So as part of their guidance, which they're really struggling with, is this limitation of 30 kids max. Or 30 kid max is what I've got in the notes. I don't know if that's 30 people or 30 kids. However, camps in Connecticut are trying to put waivers in order to get that number expanded for camps. And they're trying to determine, you know, that number specifically, you know, if they did have the cohorts, how they could accommodate multiple cohorts with the 30 number, and what that looks like, whether it's an enclosed building with walls or a pavilion type building with no walls, and they're trying to get that detail determined as well. From Massachusetts, the biggest thing I think is that the governor may have been moving towards making a decision about residence camps before the weekend and before this past Sunday. I think Betty overheard of what may be coming out and the governor's response, and she can talk to this. However, they were able to communicate to different commissioners in Massachusetts to prevent them from announcing anything preemptively before they got the guidance from CDC, ACA, and the EHE. So that was a big thing that happened on Sunday, with a lot of calls from directors in the ACA New England to say, hey, hold up, wait, please wait for this guidance before you start issuing and saying something that all resident camps could not open. So, Betty, over to you.
All right. It's been busy in New England in all of the states. And as each day goes on, the angst grows greater. There were some announcement yesterday about all the Reform Jewish camps not opening. As those kind of larger groups make announcements, that angst level just keeps going up. And we expect to hear about more of those soon. There are different states who are talking about whether camp will or won't be allowed to run. So there's still a lot of unknown. On the CDC guidance, you know that the day camp license was leaked, rules were leaked to the Washington Post. We haven't heard anything else since the leak. So nothing technically has come out formally that has said these are the day camp guidelines. We know from the ACA communications with the CDC is that they are working on overnight camp guidance. In terms of the guidebooks that we're working on with the WISE and EHE, the company put together the expert panel, etc. We still believe we're on track for those by like May 14th or 15th for those guidebooks. If things come out before then, they might release certain chapters or some other information if they can. Probably the latest news about that, and while we will not be promoting this yet until there's a formal vote on it, but the American Academy of Pediatrics has formally requested to co-brand these guidebooks with us. And that would be a great thing to put even more, make them even more legitimate in the eyes of the health departments and other people. So again, you won't see us talking about that yet until they have their formal vote on it. But our sense is that that will happen. Of course, various states across the country are already coming out with information about guidance for camps, but the bulk of them that we've talked to, both some in New England and some in other parts of the country, are really also anxiously awaiting those guidebooks and trying to wait to see if they can see those and use those before they put out their formal guidance with that.
Excuse me, Betty, can I just jump in? And one of the questions that's come up in maybe more than one time, in more than one version while you've been speaking about this, is a little more clarification about what the EHE and the ACA guidance is about and what the guidebook really is. Like, what does that mean? Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so ACA and the YMCAs of the US work together to hire a company, environmental health, whatever their last part is, EHE, sorry about that, to work on guidebooks for camps. There would be one for day camps and one for overnight camps. They have put together a panel of camp nursing, pediatric doctors, epidemiologists, environmental safety, all kinds of experts that might impact camp and camp operation. And from that, these guidebooks will hit many aspects of things that camps will need to deal with. Whether it's sleeping, transportation, whatever it is, produced from this group of experts. We are talking with health officials.
Hang on a sec, Betty. We're losing your audio.
Are,
Yeah, we are. Can you repeat like your last sentence or so?
yes. So did you hear about the types of professionals that this group is putting together, epidemiologists, et cetera? And the hope is that with that and the health department people they're talking with and the CDC that they are also communicating with, that they'll be able to put out these guidebooks kind of saying what might be the best practices or what might need to be true for camp to operate. So some of the health departments are actually waiting for these guidelines to come out. And that is also why it's so exciting if the American Academy of Pediatrics co-brands it, it adds another level of legitimacy to the work that's being done.
Right. And with all these things, Betty, both from what's coming from ACA, CDC, and also what's going to come from the state, it's going to be more of a roadmap or a vague. It's not going to be super tight, you know, checklist for every part of the day, right? It's going to be more. These are the general principles.
I think they're going to go into some detail in a number of them. Again, it's hard to say because we haven't seen them yet. We're hoping that they will come out with kind of an outline of it in the next week or so. But they're supposed to be somewhat detailed to give really good guidance.
Thanks, Betty. Anyone else, Ron or Jack or Steve, anyone want to jump in and finish off any of those thoughts before we move along?
The guidance stuff, just to, I think that it's exciting that there's a professional health engineering outfit that's doing some work in conjunction with some, you know, smart people and smart other associations and groups, including ACA. But when this guidance comes out, folks, I would think it would be, I would just raise a little caution that you think it's going to be the answer to all your questions, and that it's going to be somewhat, it's going to have to be somewhat generic to function over the course of the entire country when it comes to camping, and over the different components of what camping means and in what subset groups that is about. So in effect, in one way, you could consider some states are waiting for that and other states are not waiting for that. And I think it's just more important for everyone to realize that there is no magic book that's going to answer all the questions.
Right. And certainly a lot of the media questions we are getting is, well, is ACA going to tell camps what to do? The answer is no. Every camp is so different issues, different programs, that all we can do is try to provide you whatever information we can. But this is clearly an individual decision for each camp. There'll be no mandate from ACA. We are hoping that states will not make that kind of mandate either, although some might. But really, this is a personal decision for you, your camp families, etc. Certainly, we have seen some things, for example, in Vermont, as one of the bigger camps closed that was mentioned before. Now we've heard of a few other Vermont camps closing. You know, it's kind of interesting to see some trends that might be happening as more of these announcements are made. But probably Vermont is the one state where we've seen that most clearly so far.
We're getting a ton of great questions in the Q&A, and some of those are able to be answered. Some of them are coming up as they're being answered. Some of them we'll be able to get to at the end of our time today. But what we might do is if we can't get to your questions, we'll go through that Q&A, we'll consolidate them into questions by themes, and then we'll circulate a document or get some answers back for you guys on those. Next up, can I get Rebecca and Jack to talk about some of the questions that are coming up regarding things around, and I expect, Jack, that you'll probably prefer to answer most of these questions in a memo or email format rather than just sort of speaking contemporaneously. But can you and Rebecca just sort of talk about some of the issues around, I think people have a lot of concerns around things like maybe workers' compensation, you know, liability for, you know, not following the state's checklists, unemployment insurance claims, any of those sort of squirrely, legally insurance-y questions that seem to be popping up quite a lot.
Thank you very much. First of all, some disclaimers. One, whatever I say is general, because in all of law, the smart lawyer always says it depends. And this is certainly true of this situation. Every camp, every state is different. And so we're not going to be able to answer specific questions, but generally speaking, and probably it makes the best sense because of time constraints, not to get into any detail here because we could, lawyers can go on and on forever. I think that's the big message is that we're writing all the time. Ron is putting stuff in the hall monitor as we get it out, or put it on the Facebook as we put it out, and that will continue to happen. Obviously, you know, there's just some general principles. All camps are, of course, always worried about liability and insurance, and I have commented at one time or another about the fact that obviously, if there are established guidelines by a state, camps will want to adhere to those because of liability issues, even if there isn't a policeman waiting at the door to enforce them. That would be important. It is possible that you could have a workers' compensation claim that arises out of coronavirus by virtue of the fact that the disease was happened in camp, that you became, you got the disease in camp, and it grew out of your work there in camp, which I suppose could be arguably that you were working with somebody else who had it. Certainly sickness is a possible claim under workers' comp, but that's very fact specific. Unemployment is equally incredibly fact specific, and let me just say to you that all Maine employers who run a summer camp are seasonal employers for seasonal employees and are year-round employers for non-seasonal employees, and that those two categories are different in a number of ways, but similar in other, and that there is now in Maine a provision that will earn employees unemployment compensation based on the coronavirus, and that we can write on that in some detail, and that the first question that an employee wants to know is whether he or she is eligible, and there's a whole series, I think 8 or 10 or more conditions that an employee has to qualify in order to be eligible for. We can write on those. And then the last piece, of course, is for employers, if you are a contribution employer, and there are camps that are not, that are reimbursement employers. And so there's two different kinds of employers and different rules apply to them. But all of you who are not nonprofits are contribution employers. The only people who can be reimbursement employers are nonprofit organizations. So for-profit, you are all contribution, and under that you have a rating record, which is the amount of money that you have to pay on your payroll, and that whenever anybody gets unemployment, it can be charged against your rating record. And so there's a whole series of rules around that, including different rules for seasonal employers or seasonal employees in this case, and non-seasonal, and we can write on that as well. So all of those issues are dependent on who you are and where you are. One of the questions that I was asked that I can touch on briefly was that if you let a employer that you didn't hire an employee, you have a contract with an employee, and then you cancel that contract before the employee has put in any time, been paid any money. And I don't know the answer to that specifically, except that the law as it reads clearly suggests that a person is going to be possibly being, his or her unemployment is possibly going to be charged to the rating record of an employer for whom he performed services or she performed services, that the employer paid him or her wages. And so if you cancel a contract before that happens, it is unlikely, even if the employee were to be eligible for unemployment in Maine, that the rating record of the camp could be charged for that because there was never any, quote, services rendered or wages paid. Again, it depends on where the employee lives, because employees that live in other states have another set of rules. So we're in a very complicated area, and much can be written on it, but probably ought to not be talked about very much more here. Let's see, what was the other one? Just so you know, corporate officials are employees if they are employees of the corporation. And so if there's unemployment, they can apply for benefits just like any other employee. And so that question has come up, and I just wanted to pass that on. I think that, you know, I could wax eloquent or not on this for a long period of time, and it doesn't make any sense. I'd like to have Rebecca pipe in, though, on a subject which will be near and dear to your heart and arises right out of the coronavirus. So go for it.
Yeah, and it was a question I think that somebody had asked in the Q&As about paid leave, and whether, I think it was a day camp asking, but this would apply to everyone if you opened. I think the question was somewhat framed around, do we need to budget for having 2 weeks leave or sick leave for an employee who then gets sick with coronavirus while they're working for us? And the answer is yes. And there is I'm going to call it a new act because it came out this spring, but it seems old given how quickly everything is moving now. It's the Families First Coronavirus Recovery Act, FFCRA. And what that does is it requires all employers to provide employees with 2 weeks paid sick leave for coronavirus related sickness. And it actually covers a bit more than just actively being sick with COVID-19. What it does is it covers you have to pay your employees 100% paid sick leave if they have COVID-19 symptoms and are sick with it. And then you also, or if they're ordered by a doctor to quarantine because of a suspicion of COVID-19, that would also qualify. And you pay them 2/3 of their regular pay for sick leave if they are caring for a family member who has coronavirus, or if they need to be caring for children potentially because the child's school or other daycare facility is closed. There's a provision for that that's covered underneath here. The nice thing about this is you are required to provide the 2 weeks paid leave, but at the end of the year, you'll get a tax credit getting you a dollar for dollar reimbursement of that 2 weeks paid. So the federal government is in the end going to be picking up the tab for it, but it is something you need to be aware of going into the summer. And actually everyone should be aware of it now with your year-round employees. There is a new poster. I know you're all aware of the required posters we have to have up at camp. There is a new one on the FFCRA that would also need to be put up at camp. And if you are working remotely now and have employees working for you, you should send that poster out to them electronically, and that satisfies the requirement of having it posted in the public space. And I can send Ron the link to get that poster for you. Was that what you wanted me to speak on, Chuck, or is there anything else?
We were having problems hearing you because you're breaking up. I'm sorry to say, but are there questions that come out of your conversation? She was the last piece of it, which was the most difficult, was there are particular requirements around signage in your camp and or information sent to your employees if they're not in your workplace dealing with these issues. But again, I think it's appropriate that we write on this rather than try to cover it all here. And again, I just want to warn you that when we write from a term of general, and that various exceptions always apply in these situations to individual programs and camps and kinds and lengths and all of that. So,
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Rebecca. I am just trying to be mindful of everyone's time here. By my clock, we were hoping to be done in 90 minutes, so we've got just over 20 minutes remaining. We've got a couple of other things that we're going to try to hit quickly, and then we'll use any remaining time to answer more questions and bring up other things that the panelists have brought up. So Steve and/or Fritz, can one of you just speak briefly about the new PPP guidance that was issued this week for seasonal businesses and how that might impact camps?
Yes, we both can. I'm happy to do it. Or Fritz, if you want to do it, I know you got it. It's up to you.
You start, I'll fill in.
I'll go. So you all know that the first round of relief that was in relief number 3, that amount of money for PPP was decimated in 11 days. The next round of relief 3.5, had another amount set aside for small business. That is now available funds. So the first comment and suggestion is you contact your lender, your bank. If you have not processed through that program yet, there still might be a chance for you to do so. This gets you the concept and the potential for debt forgiven relief if you follow the rules. The interesting part of the 3.5 version is that it took into consideration seasonality, which the first one did not. And to my understanding, you can now consider in your formula for what amount may be debt forgiven based on payroll. You can take a 12-week snapshot that hypothetically includes your summer 12-week snapshot rather than a snapshot that revolves around your annual. This would probably provide a substantially different number for those of us in summer seasonal businesses. I do know that there are some who have contacted their lender and have gone back and said, "Hey, can I get my number reallocated? Can this be reconsidered?" And I've heard that the answer is yes, that's a possibility. It doesn't even sound like you have to reapply if you've already been in the system. It's just a reallocation, and you have to document and provide further paperwork to prove your 12-week snapshot. But in effect, it looks like a very positive thing. That's what I got, Fritz, and you might have more.
Anecdotally, I'll say that the process of applying for PPP was very stressful for people. It felt like we were waiting for a final exam or something. It was crazy trying to get everything done on time. We got all the paperwork in. Our banker happens to be Jack Day at Norway Savings Bank, and he reached out to us 2 days ago and said, "There's a new thing coming down the pike. It might be of interest to you." When I looked at it originally, we did the math and say, "Listen, it's not really worth it." And then he kept at it and emailed me again and again. And when we finally did the math, it actually doubled the amount that we were allotted to, because you can pick your time period instead of just saying, well, it's starting from the beginning of that program. So it does make a huge difference to camps and the actual process. I don't know what other banks are going to be, but the process that I went through was literally sending the email to them with the updated numbers, and they changed it at the portal. And I don't know what it is after that, but I know that we did it yesterday afternoon. It was approved this morning. So that part of it has been very, very fast. So I would suggest reaching out to your bankers and looking at what your specific situations are. And again, I went into it thinking, no way I want to cross that bridge again. And I'm glad that Jack Day pushed us to try.
That's great info. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Fritz. Kat, can you talk briefly about the upcoming Bob Ditter webinars or workshops?
Yep. Just very quickly, obviously we are going to be in a position where camps are individually making big decisions, and every camp will be making their own judgment based on the information we get in the coming weeks. So we've set up, Bob, to do 2 webinars this May. One is this coming Wednesday, May 6th at 1 p.m. And this one is going to be specifically for those of us who are considering the not, suspending our 2020 season and not opening. So he will be talking about what to say to your families and how to say it. He will be also helping us with how we help parents and staff with the disappointment and loss and sadness and ramifications of the decisions we're going to be making. So how to support our camp families and our staff through that process. The second one is yet to be determined the date, but understanding that there will likely be camps that also plan to continue to open, and the campers and staff coming to camps this summer are going to be coming with unique needs, particularly in relation to mental health. They've been cooped up, they've not been socializing, they've missed all kinds of special events in their lives, and camp is going to look different too, even if you do open. So he will be focusing specifically on understanding and working with mental health issues related to those coming to your camp this summer. That date is yet to be determined, but the first one will be next Wednesday, May 6th at 1 p.m.
Thank you, Kat. Peter, I think you were going to talk a bit about contacts and communication with elected officials. Is that right?
Yes. We appreciate how stressful this is for everyone on the call, panelists and otherwise. We also appreciate that with all of the conversations and emails from Tuesday on, that everyone was hoping for more information today, and even we on Tuesday and Wednesday thought maybe we would have some. And it became clear in that meeting yesterday that they were happy to give us the audience, which we thought was very positive, and they were happy to get our information and only gave us snippets that Laura and Steve have been able to pass on to you about their line of thinking as they pass this information on to the decision makers. So we appreciate that there are still more not very clear answers at all to your questions, and the timing looks very daunting because even the EHE is 10 days from now or longer, and at the same time, Maine is looking to make decisions more quickly. So on the one hand, that helps, but that might be before the EHE and ACA makes the pronouncements. What Ron, Steve, Laura, and the rest of the MICA board is working on that will be passed on later today is one of those letters to you that you can pass on to the governor's office and or various representatives at the state level. So more of an advocacy piece that you can choose to use in that draft or change. What we have been trying so hard to do throughout, and especially in the last 10 days is push for information that every camp needs to make a decision that is best for them. And working with Laura Blaisdell, working on this demonstration is to give them an insight into what camps think they can do to run safely, and to have that cover all of these areas based on what we know they're thinking in general, and to give everyone who's listening so intently to this the opportunity to still have a chance to make the decision to open based on the guidance we're getting from the government. And so you will have that piece later today, I believe, Ron, if that's right, and can use that if you feel it's appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Ron, before we get to the polls, which I know everyone's eager to exercise their democratic rights here, and Fritz, I'll make sure that panelists can vote this time. Ron, can you just quickly talk about next week's town hall, the May 8th town hall, and what's going to happen with that?
Sure. Yes, we plan to continue on with these town halls, as Bijette said, on a weekly basis. And I believe our intention is to invite Dr. Laura Blaisdell to be a part of next week's, so she can address some of the issues that we've been talking about. It will be the same time next week.
Okay, thanks, Ron. I'm now going to launch a poll because I want to make sure that we get these in. The first one is for the big question, open versus closed, and it's separated. Please just read and make sure that you answer. There's two polls. We tried to make it a little more, a little clearer. One's for day camps, one's for resident/overnight camps. But we didn't, just pick whichever category is closest to you. And then there's a couple of follow-up questions for if you're closed or leaning closed versus if you're leaning open. So I'm just going to launch that poll now and give it 90 seconds or so to run. And then while we're waiting for people, I just wanted to mention that we are intending on keeping these town halls running, and it's a regular Friday thing, so keep these Friday mornings open for now. Can everyone see those? Okay, I'm starting to see votes popping up now. Okay. Can everyone? Okay. Not many people are voting yet, so it's got me worried. Can I just get a thumbs up from panelists?
I think Matt, I think if you don't answer all the questions, it doesn't allow you to submit.
Oh, okay. You got to answer all 4 questions before it allows you vote?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, they're coming in now. Thank you all. All right.
Matt, while we have a lull, can I just apologize to people? I'm a horrible typer and an even worse speller. And I tried to answer as many questions as we could. Some of the day camp ones were really hard. Tom is great at that stuff. It is, I wanted to get the answers out there, not necessarily having to be grammatically correct. So I apologize. I am literate most of the time.
I think it's acceptable, Fritz. That has been a fire hose of questions in the Q&A today.
Matt, if you have to answer all the questions, it's not applicable. Do you just click other so that you can...
just click other so that you can finish it off. Yeah. And then we're getting some good comments in the chat as well, and we'll go back and we'll consolidate those as well shortly. And I'll just give this another 10 seconds or so, and then we'll move on to our next poll. Okay. All right. your time is just about done. Thank you all. And so I'll share those results quickly so that everyone can just spend a few seconds looking through those. If anyone wants to make comments, feel free. Okay. Now I'm going to just launch the stop share results. I'm going to launch our second poll here. So this poll is really about the factors that are influencing your decision to you know, open or not open this summer. So just read the question, and the first question is for the camps that are closed or leaning closed. The second question is for the camps that are leaning open. So I'll go ahead and launch that one now. And Ron, did you have anything that we needed to cover just while people are processing this?
No, I think you all have done an amazing job of covering what's been going on this week.
Okay. And I will say there's been a lot more just amazing questions popping up in the Q&A, and a lot of them are questions that probably require a bit more you know, time and thought to put in, because they are getting into specifics. I will say again that there's not going to be clear answers for a lot of these questions, and that it's going to be, again, that idea of you'll get guidelines, but it's going to really come up to each individual camp and their leadership to be making their decisions for some of those questions that you're asking there. Okay. We'll give this poll another 30 seconds or so. And then I see Peter's raised his hand, so we'll call on Peter shortly after this.
Matt, I just want to jump in and say also, I tried typing quickly, especially to the questions that asked about PPE, and there were a lot of questions about the 14-day quarantine, and there were really good questions about, you know, each camp having a specific different days that they would need to quarantine or length of session, and most of my answers were, you know, stay tuned and watch the space, and you know, we can answer that a little bit better in the days coming with more information from the state, but right now we just don't. All of those intricate questions about the 14-day quarantine, we just don't have at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. All right, I'm going to end that second poll now, and I'll share the results of that one for now, and then we'll put these poll results, we'll send those out to everyone. So if you miss them now, don't worry about it. And I'll go back and share the other poll shortly. And then Peter Caston's got his hand raised, so I'm just going to click on that. Hi, Peter, can you hear us, or can you talk now? No. All right. Maybe he's not there. All right. Was there any of the questions in the Q&A that anyone wanted to take a crack at before we run out of time here, Laura?
There was a quick question about local hospitals, and interestingly, that did not come up at the state meeting at all. They did not seem concerned about local hospitals' capacity for the influx of people coming to the state, although we've seen that their guidelines are telling us not to influx people into the state this summer at the levels that we're used to. But, and again, I've spoken with a regional hospital director who has said that he welcomes businesses opening this summer if they can do so safely, that they are ready to support those businesses that might have not just sickness, but need other medical needs.
Thanks, Laura. I did see one of the questions in the Q&A popped up was something about asking Jack to comment on the liability attached to running any type of virtual program this summer. And Jack, I'm suspecting your answer to that might be talk to your insurance company, but do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I have to admit, I have not thought of that question, whether there's liability issues around virtual programs. There is some brand new law about compliance with ADA on electronic messages. And that's new, and I have not looked at it. Rebecca, I'm not sure you have. So I really don't know the answer. I have to sit down and kind of think that through and figure it out.
Matt,
can I
Betty
jump in?
may
Matt?
be able to answer a bit about that.
Sorry, who?
Betty Bussell.
Betty, go ahead.
I also have information, Matt, but let's let Betty go first.
Okay.
Go ahead, Tom.
Oh, thank you, Betty. Sorry, super politeness here. Redwoods has given us a bunch of information related to virtual programming. The same kinds of things apply. 2D leadership, two adults present. Make sure that you make recordings. You get permission to record the kids, make recordings and hold on to those for a little bit of time. And just keep an eye on it. Good. There's a variety of other things. I know our camp director, Cara, has been doing a tremendous amount of that. And we think we're doing it safe. So, but there's some good guidance from Redwoods, and they're willing. Redwoods announced that you can share their guidance to other non-Redwoods camps at this time to support them. So I'm sure if someone got in touch with us, either Cara or I, we could forward that out to them.
It would be great if there were a webinar on this.
There probably has been a blizzard of those things, but I know they have written guidance for sure.
That was a leading question.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Kat.
I don't remember when it is. It got rescheduled, but Chalmers is offering a webinar on this very topic. So keep your eyes peeled.
So as ACA New England as well, we have one coming up with some of the legal ramifications. And I would echo everything that Tom mentioned. There's only one state that I know of so far has specifically discussed virtual camps, and that is Connecticut. And on the last call with the state, they actually said that they did not think that virtual camps in Connecticut would need to be licensed. They may have changed their mind about that. I hope they do. But I just want to reiterate the importance of taping your calls and having more than one person on there. Unfortunately, I know from a couple of programs that have been doing virtual programs, a number of people had to report things that they saw to the state. And that's really what you're paying attention to. You know, if you see a parent kind of beating on a child and you're there, that's your obligation to report that. And those are some of the things that you're looking for. And the reason that you want to hold on to them is also to prove that nothing inappropriate happened on your end. You were staffed appropriately. And so a lot of it is really about protecting yourself.
Okay, and the ACA webinar is May 5th at 1 o'clock. And there's information about it on our main camp director's Facebook group page.
So we're hard up against 12 o'clock. I know we didn't get to all the questions, and I'm sure that there's still plenty of questions that haven't been asked. Some of the medical questions will definitely be best addressed in next week's webinar. Some of it I don't know that there's solid answers to, but I would reiterate what Ron just said and say check that that Facebook page. It's super helpful. If you're not on Facebook, make sure you're getting your hall monitor, check your junk email filter and make sure it's not going in there, because all the links and all the stuff that has been discussed today is being linked to in there, usually multiple times. We're at 12 o'clock, unless anyone else has anything pressing to make note of, any of the panelists? No? Bajette, do you want to give us all some inspiration as we sign off here?
Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I think you covered everything really, really well. And obviously it's more to come. And also, please feel free to reach out to your board member representative for Main Summer Camp. The next Main Summer Camp actual board meeting is not until Wednesday. We'll be having that board meeting. But also please feel free to reach out, hopefully to any of the panelists if you're open to that, but or email Ron, and thank you guys. Blessings.
Right. We'll share poll results and we'll share information to questions answered in the Q&A as soon as we can. But thanks all. No one's got anything. Have a great weekend. Tomorrow looks beautiful.